So I want to introduce myself just a little bit. Who am I? You know, my name is Andy. We got there. I'm a bartender. I've been in the service industry for 10 plus years. I love serving drinks. I love having conversations with people. And I think that that's awesome. It's something I've been doing my whole life, and I hope to continue to do it. I'm also a trivia host. So those pub nights where you have nothing to do on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, and you and some friends, maybe you grab a beer at your local establishment and answer some weird questions about stuff that you don't need to know, but it's a pretty good time. I run those. It's really fun, and it's been one of my passions since I was a kid. I am a millennial, and this is where we get into the stuff that's actually important to what I'm talking about. I am a millennial. I see a couple of you out there. We get a bad rap a lot. We kill industries. We're all about ourselves, which I am starting on a slide about myself, so you tell me what that means. But what I think is super important, we take a lot of selfies. That's me and my mom. I guess that's my mom. We were just at the world champion Milwaukee Bucks basketball game, taking in the game against the Celtics 2 nights ago. I'm rooting for them tonight. But what's important about being a millennial or working with millennials is that we are the last generation of people who remember what it was like before the internet. So as much and as annoying as we can be with all of our needs, our me's, and our technology, the thing that is really important to keep in mind, especially as we talk through the rest of this presentation, is the fact that the next generations aren't even going to be at the level that we're at. They're going to be even farther and further embedded when it comes to technology and the different ways that you can interact with a business and with the world around you. So while we talk about these emerging trends that we've been seeing online in the past 5 to 10 years, keep in mind they're not going away. They're only going to become more and more further entrenched in the way that we interact with each other. And of course, I am a technologist. I mentioned it a little bit earlier. I work for a company called Reputation. It is a software tool that certainly helps manage a lot of the things that I'm going to be talking about today. I'm not here to sell to you. Just know that tools like Reputation exist. If you're interested, certainly find me afterward. We can have a conversation. But really what I'm talking about more is we work with brands all the time who come to us and say, we have these needs to better understand our customers as well as how our customers think about us and talk about us out in the wild. And we need tools to be able to support that, understand that, and optimize that. And so that's what I do every day on a regular basis with some of our biggest clients and prospects. And so today I'm talking about customer experience. Some of you may have heard this called CX before. I imagine all of you at some point have been a customer and had an experience with a business. And you know, those really shape and inform the way that you view those brands, you view those businesses, and ultimately the businesses that you decide to do business with. For doing definitions, Forbes describes customer experience as the cumulative impact of multiple touch points over the course of a customer's interaction with an organization. It's a fancy way of saying every time you deal with a business, how do you feel when you do it? And that doesn't happen just once, that happens every time you talk to them, whether you're looking them up online, you're going in, talking in person, you're on a phone call, even after the fact, when you're finished with the business, you've bought the product, you've bought the service, and you're actually using it. How do you feel about it then? That whole thing is what customer experience envelops. Businesses also would make phone calls to capture customer sentiment. Most of the phone calls that I receive on my phone, I don't answer because they're not from people I know. Everyone I talk to is within my contact list. If it's from someone else, I'm probably ignoring it or at least letting it go to voicemail, and I certainly am not calling that number back to take a survey. More recently, things have gotten a little bit more evolved. We've got email. Raise your hand if you have received an email from a company to leave feedback. How many of you do that the majority of the time? Majority. I didn't think so. It's because nobody does. We don't have time for them. They really don't even take that long, but in the list of priorities of all the things that we need to do, I will tell you I don't ever take those surveys, or unless I have a specific reason or need to specifically share my feedback with that particular business. And so the world that we're in today, though, you're still leaving and sharing your feedback about that business all the time. In fact, many times with each and every interaction that you have. Things are just a little bit different. And we're going to talk today a little bit about why. I'm going to share a quick little personal story. This is Clementine. I love her to death. She is a 95-pound American bulldog. She is the sweetest dog in the world, and there will never be a better dog than Clementine. She, unfortunately, right now has a little bit of a thing. Big dogs happen, where she's limping a little bit on her back leg. It's been hard to figure out exactly what it is. Dogs, after all, they can't talk to tell you where it hurts or why it hurts or anything. And so, we've been going to her primary care vet for probably the past 2-3 months to see if we can get a better understanding of how we get her walking normal. And after 2-3 months, the vet was just like, this is an orthopedic issue. I can't help you here with my skill set or with the analysis that we have in this particular vet. I would recommend you see an orthopedic specialist. I said, great, that sounds good. I love that. I love to hear that. Do you know any? They said, of course, we do. Here is a link. Here's the name of one of the vets that's out there that does specialties in the back of the legs, big dogs. You'll love them. I said, thank you to that veterinarian. And then after that appointment, they sent me an email survey. I didn't take it. Then I went and saw vet number 1. This is not her the rest of the way. We're talking stock images here. So I looked into that vet. I Googled her name online, and I called to make an appointment. I made it over phone. Like I mentioned, I called. And then they gave me a quote of $400 to $4,500. That's a lot of money. I was not ready to spend that. At least not in the moment, not without doing my research, right? So, I was like, well, thank you. This is really helpful information. Let me get back to you as far as how I want to proceed as far as treatment with this dog. I decided to get a second opinion, and they didn't send me a survey. So then I went and I looked in my different networks and resources of places I could particularly find another doctor, maybe one that's a little bit cheaper than the one that I'd asked for. I talked to some friends. No one knew any orthopedic specialists, especially not really in my neighborhood. So I am a part of the neighborhood Facebook group. It is great for fights about dibs and fights about local businesses coming through that they may or may not like. But there are certainly some dog owners out there, and they shared some feedback as far as businesses and veterinarians that they'd recommend. They tagged those pieces of feedback many times with that vet's Facebook page, that those pieces of feedback led to the recommendations channel as far as that Facebook place is concerned. And then I also Googled orthopedic veterinarians and looked at reviews from there. And then anytime there was a vet that was mentioned in both of them, that was one that I took down and I gave a phone call to. So the first one that I talked to, I'm not going to put their name on blast. It was not a good experience, spoiler alert. I checked their reviews, and then I called the number that was on their Google listing. Right there. I had an automated machine. We've all done it before. 2 rings, and we thank you very much for calling our veterinary services. If you are a patient, hit 1. That whole thing. I went through that and got a dial tone, not a dial tone, whatever the sound it is that it makes when it's ringing. Both times I waited about 2 minutes, and then I hung up. Both times. And I checked their website too, and they had no chat feature there. And so I did want to let them know, like, hey, someone's dropping the ball here. So I posted on their Facebook. To this day, I've not heard anything more from that particular veterinarian's office. The third vet, once again, I checked their reviews. I called the number on the Google listing. I successfully got an appointment scheduled, and then they sent me a text confirmation. I actually, on the day I was going to bring Clementine in, I used Google Chat, and I asked them a question via their Google listing the day before. And they answered my question. I brought her in. I took her in. The quote was even worse. $55,000 to $6,000 for this surgery that my dog needed. She has apparently 2 partially torn doggy ACLs, which There's no real way to fix those except for surgically repair them. After that visit, while I'm still figuring out how I'm going to pay for this massive dog surgery, they sent me a survey via text message. It was 2 questions. Look, just like this, right here. And 2 quick questions in my text inbox, just a quick little star rating, and then an opportunity for me to share more feedback as it was. The experience was great outside of the whole cost of it thing. So I shared that with them, gave them 4 stars, and they thanked me for my feedback. I picked vet 3. That was the one I ended up taking my dog to. I trusted them the most. They were listening to me the most. They gave me the best amount of feedback. And even though I was going to be paying more, and it wasn't the place that my vet initially recommended, I had more confidence in them that they were going to take care of my dog than I had confidence in anybody else based off of the experience that we'd had. And so that story that I'm sharing with you, I share is important because that is how everyone's doing business these days. You have a very small window to do it right. And if you don't, the next one's on Google. And they can look at the reviews and they can understand and they can learn and they can choose them instead. And if businesses aren't listening to all the places where that feedback can happen, 1, they're doing themselves a disservice because they don't know why or why not they're being chosen by the customers that they have. And 2, they're doing themselves a disservice in marketing because there's no strong opinions for people to be able to see, understand, have an expectation of what they're going to experience when they're working with that business, and ultimately feel more confident and a more informed decision based off of those feedback cues that are out there. And so before, again, old country way, when it was just surveys, you didn't have a solid breakdown of all of the different pieces of feedback that was out there. You only had what people responded to when you asked them and when nobody else was looking. That's not capturing people who decided not to go with you. That's not capturing the things that you don't ask about. That's only capturing the information that you're asking about and the sentiment surrounding those different aspects. Today, review feedback lives everywhere. Whether it is survey responses, which still do play a very important role in understanding consumer sentiment and measuring the effectiveness of the experience that your consumers are having, but they're talking and they're sharing it in all the different things that we engage with in our day-to-day lives. Not only that we go specifically to engage with, but actually that we're engaging with already, and it's just the place that we are, and we share that information there too. And so keeping tabs across sort of the greater landscape of what we'll call listening posts is extremely important in having an effective business. And those listening posts can be different sorts of things. Many times in the B2C world is social media. Is certainly Google, the place where everybody's going to get all the information that they might need in order to make a decision. It's certainly the only place that I go. I don't Bing, I don't Yahoo, I don't do anything else. I Google it, Google shows me my stuff, and I go. Again, I'm a millennial. It's only going to get worse if that scares you. And so understanding where your customer shops, engages, and having a presence there is a fundamental key of today's customer experience landscape. And so you take a look at this customer journey where I'm going through and deciding what vet I have, what's out there. How do I find that information out? I consider the different options. We've got the people who didn't talk to me, the one that was the initial referral, and then ultimately the one that I went with. And I'm engaging with them of the feedback that's out there, but I'm also starting to leave it myself. I left a post on their Facebook to see if they would respond to me. I could have left a review, but that seemed punitive. I didn't want to do that particularly for that business. And certainly I'm going to their website to see if they had web chat. I checked with my Facebook group to see, and I read reviews for every single business before I even decided to contact with them. Again, this is how consumers are shopping and how people are using the internet these days, and it's critically important for your business to be able to understand these receptors as in these listening posts as you are continuing to sort of build out and understand how you can improve customer experience. Because at the end of the day, the business with a better customer experience is going to build much more brand loyalty, repeat business, and also word of mouth, which I think everybody here could agree is some of the strongest, most powerful consumer feedback that can exist. And weaponizing that is how a lot of times we're able to develop and build the businesses that we are either working within or looking to grow. And so this is where we translate to the current state to how can we understand and manage this a little bit better. There's a lot of different ways to sort of interpret and understand CX in a digital landscape, but ultimately these boil down to sort of three basic premises. The first piece is you got to listen. You got to listen in the way that you want to listen, but you certainly have to be listening in the way that your customer is talking to you. And so again, across those different places of feedback, Google, social media, but also SMS, which is a private channel, but is increasingly one that people are using on their phones. I can see 3 or 4 people right now with them out. Not calling you out, keep doing your stuff. But you're using your phone. This is where we live. That the Google chat that I had, actually, never mind, that's coming later in this. It's coming later in the presentation. I got a little ahead of myself. But spoiler alert again, there was a point where I was in a meeting with that vet and I couldn't answer the phone call about the way that they were taking care of my dog. They texted me and said, hey, we have an important phone call for you. Everything is okay. Just call us at your earliest convenience. That was so profoundly helpful for me in that moment that I would have left my meeting to call the vet after my dog was about to get surgery. Like, are you kidding me? That's like a drop everything and do it. I was presenting at the time I couldn't do it. Just being able to see that was huge. They were listening to me and they continued to build my loyalty to that particular brand. In this case, the care that they were delivering my dog. After you've listened and you've set up these listening posts across sort of the greater customer experience, you have to be able to act on them. There's a person at my company who's been doing this far longer than I have, who says that do not ask a question that you do not expect to do something about when you're given an answer, right? If I asked you, hey guys, what do you think of my presentation so far? I like to think you all like it. If you don't, again, it's okay. But if someone said, hey, and I'm not asking that explicitly, because someone were to raise their hand and say, it actually is a bad presentation. I wish you were talking more about the Milwaukee Bucks. I would have to change my presentation about the Milwaukee Bucks, which again, I would have loved to do. But otherwise, it would seem like I was rude and not actually interested in the feedback that you were providing. And I'm not saying this action needs to happen one-to-one on every piece of feedback, but at a minimum, it needs to be acknowledged. And if you as a business can feasibly make that customer's experience better, that's why you're asking the question. And then from there, after that action, there's a learning piece to it as well. Certainly in the moment, when things are very uncomfortable, potentially painful, it's important to be empathetic and active based off the feedback that you're receiving. But when you take a step back outside of that moment, ultimately, you need to be able to start to collect the levels of data and the levels of information for you to analyze at a high level, what is my business doing that is potentially inflicting these kinds of pains, these gaps away from the brand promise that I promised I would deliver, or at least that I would like to be able to deliver, and what changes can we make institutionally to hopefully make that pain a little bit less, to narrow the gap between what the actual experience is and that brand promise. And so you need a way to be able to collect that feedback, understand it, and then ultimately empower and incentivize the organization to be hitting those metrics based off of the things that you're measuring and wanting to learn from. So let's talk about that first one. Listen to customer feedback wherever your customers are sharing it. Once again, I bring this chart back up. Take a look at sort of the feedback that's been used and the feedback that's been given. Commit it to memory because there will be a test. And the test happens now. Remember my journey? Show of hands, anybody, I'm going to call on you. Where do you see missed opportunities in my customer journey that one of these businesses could have done better? You?
That one, they could have sent you a survey to figure out why you didn't want to come back.
Exactly. Vet one, for those who didn't hear. They could have sent me a survey and asked me why I didn't ultimately choose them. I would have told them at first I didn't choose them because of the price. But depending on when they sent that survey, ultimately it was because there was another brand that did a better job of communicating. And I would have happily shared that with the vet that was vet number one, because they were nice people. She was a nice vet. It was recommended from my primary vet. So they could have caught that business back if they'd just been a little bit more attentive. Who else? Where else are there some missed opportunities?
Vet 2 didn't call you back. We're waiting for Mike.
Oh, is there a oh, that's fun.
Vet 2 didn't contact you at all.
Vet 2 did not. Vet 2 did a pretty bad job, let's be honest, guys. They didn't contact me at all. If I was vet number 2, how would I have known why I didn't become a customer? Couldn't have. Outside of checking your Facebook after the fact, they still never contact me after the case. That could have been an act too. But in that point, the business had no idea at all why I was not their customer. And so think about all of your own businesses, all the places that you're working, that you're trying to grow, build, establish. Where in that customer journey flow are you taking into account why people aren't choosing you? And if you don't have a good answer for that, it's probably a good idea to start having one, or building at least a way for that to be measured in one way or another. All right, I'll do one more missed opportunity. Get that orange box somewhere else. There's like 8 of them up there, guys. Come on. I believe in you. My man. I can throw it too.
Sorry, Vet 2 again, but they didn't even respond on the Facebook page. So no phone call back, no responding on social.
Correct. They didn't respond on social at all. I gave them an opportunity. And again, I was doing my due diligence. None of these numbers were great. I wasn't particularly excited about any of them. But I gave them a shot because of the reviews that they had on their page, as well as the recommendation that I'd gotten from my neighbor. They did not respond or were not listening on Facebook when I gave them an opportunity to call me back. Now, this whole journey from the looking around process probably took a week and a half front to back. Had they responded to me maybe like 3 days or 4 days later, it probably would have been a little too far after the window of me being willing to give them that time. But had they responded in a day or two, yeah, I would have talked to them. Because I thought I was doing something wrong because I couldn't get a hold of anybody. And so like those opportunities are huge. You need to be able to listen to where the feedback is happening. And so when it comes to that listening, again, if we look to sort of the old ways of doing CX, if you're just sending surveys, it's not enough. One, people aren't going to take them. The email survey is the easiest thing to get rid of in like the whole darn world. I delete like 3 of them a day. And I'm in this business. And so you need to be creative with the way that you're distributing the survey and the way that people are engaging with it, or find other means to be listening. And a lot of times that survey itself is just the specter of it being too long and you having to answer so many questions. If you can embed a survey almost in an email and say, these are the 2 questions we want to know, can you answer them for us in 30 seconds? You're going to get a little bit higher level of a completion rate to be able to understand that sentiment a little bit more. So keeping that in mind, you also need to, in addition to those solicited pieces of feedback, be paying attention to the unsolicited feedback that lives out there sort of in the ecosystem as well. And when we talk about that ecosystem, the one that is by far the most profound that I have seen emerging in the 5 years that I've been working with these brands at this particular company is Google. I mentioned it a little bit before. Certainly everyone here knows what Google is and certainly how important it is. But the sheer volume of users who are engaging with Google every day and potentially giving your brand an opportunity to appear in that search is mind-boggling. Globally, Google dominates about 92% of the global share of search. Someone is looking for something that is almost certainly where they're going to be find it. There are more than 1 billion users on Google Maps, which is where a lot of these reviews and pieces of feedback can be left. And based off those search results, 88% will call or visit a business within 24 hours based off of those search results. Just like me, every single one of those vets, I looked for their reviews, I found their telephone information, and I called them within 15 minutes, much less 24 hours. And Google has also started tabulating how often and how people are engaging with these searches, to the point where they've learned that 65% of searches end without a click. So in Google results, there is the little box that pops up on the top with the three pieces in a map, or the knowledge panel that's on the right side, that very valuable piece of real estate. Depending on the search, depending on the business, you might be in one of those if they're looking for you. And then there's the organic links underneath there, just that'll take you directly to the web page, that sort of a thing. Google used to just be those links and that web page. When I'm talking about no-click searches, that 65% on that bottom statistic, that it means that the searchers are not clicking on an organic link. They are clicking or getting the information that they need just from that map pack and just from that knowledge panel alone, meaning that that particular consumer has learned everything they need without clicking or engaging, just based off of the information that Google has presented to them. And what is one of the first things that Google presents to you is your online reviews. That star average. It comes quick, it comes fast, and it comes with all the information about a business that you need to be able to decide where you're going. Now, especially in the pandemic, we noticed that consumers were using the reviews to determine what kind of experience they were going to be having when they engage with a business. I'm an auto dealership, let's say. How do I know how to buy a car when we all have to wear masks and everything is shut down? They're still open. Or maybe get my car serviced, I don't know. Either one of those. People were going in and seeing people talk about whether they felt safe, whether they needed to wear masks, what the entire user experience was before they even went to that business's website, before they clicked anywhere else. And keeping an understanding of, hey, we're going to be listening here, and also encouraging people to leave feedback there is a really important piece of managing your business's overall online web presence, and certainly your reputation. So if you have an opportunity, my first recommendation, if you take one thing away from here, is that if you can optimize and create a place on Google for your business to be easily engaged with, it's going to do you better. Guaranteed. At a minimum, it's going to do you the same. But making it easy for consumers to engage within that particular environment is huge. And you can see the difference between a good one and a bad one, right? Anyone can claim a listing and be able to have a business name and their address down here and a telephone number here, and maybe the hours. But Google gives you, and is continuing to give you, so much deeper of an opportunity to add videos, to add pictures, answer any questions that might be left there, be able to make posts talking about what's going on in that particular location or what's going on with the greater business. Ultimately, Google's goal is to keep you in Google. I don't know how many of you have thought about this before, but Google makes money the more you work within Google. Because if you're staying in Google and not going to these websites, there's a much greater chance that you're clicking on one of Google's ads. And so the more that Google can do to evolve the experience that you don't have to leave Google, the more that you're going to engage with Google, the more you're going to click on their ads, the more Google makes money. Fantastic. So as marketers, as business people, the more you pay attention to the interfaces that Google gives you, the greater benefit it's going to have for you, because millennials like me don't think about this stuff. We Google it and Google shows us our answer, and then we engage with it. Like, if you think even about the reviews that you see, not just on restaurants, not just on car dealerships, but all of the different ways that reviews impact your decision, a lot of that's because Google decided reviews were going to impact your decision. And Google is going to rely on those reviews to ultimately determine which businesses it's going to recommend. Because again, Google wants you to stay, wants you to trust Google. what better source of data for Google to use to say, this is the best place for a cheeseburger near me, or this is the best place for an orthopedic veterinarian near me, than the data I have from my own users telling me how good of a business or how good of a burger or how good of a vet this particular business is. And so the more that you trust Google and the more you trust those reviews, the more you're using Google, the more you're clicking their ads, they make money. It's a great time. So make sure you set up those listening posts. Google would be my foremost recommendation. But the other thing to keep in mind here too is also specifically, where are your customers engaging? If you were going to buy whatever you're selling, whether it's a product, whether it's a service, whether it's a software, etc., where would I look first? And how many times along that particular journey can I potentially listen for feedback in ways that that's being engaged with? Sometimes that's telephone calls. Sometimes that is chatbots. Sometimes that's on your website. Sometimes that's even within emails. Whatever, and the more you can understand what that feedback looks like and be listening and acting on it, the more it's going to benefit you and benefit your customers. I mentioned that act piece. Number 2, when we have this feedback that we are listening to, act on it, but not just act on it in a way that's easy for your customers to engage with. Now, this is the post epilogue as far as Clementine's journey. So after I picked vet number 3, I scheduled the surgery with him by telephone. After I scheduled the surgery, when I did so, now is the fun part. When I did so without even prompting the surgery, I was like, all right, I trust these people. Just look at her. How could you not? Whatever, it's worth it. We'll make it work. I didn't think they were going to do anything, but when I called them, they said that they had listened. They had seen my survey response about the cost of the surgery and me not loving it. And also that I had gotten if we want to scoot back here, I'm going to do a little bit of clicking. I mentioned in that survey specifically, I forgot to call it out. Sorry, here we go. I mentioned in that survey specifically that they were about $1,000 to $1,500 more than the other vet that I talked to. On that phone call, as we advanced through my slides, they actually said, hey, if you can give us proof of the quote that you'd received from that other vet, we'd be willing to work with you on price. And when they did that, they knocked off $750 from the cost of the surgery. So I was already in, but are you kidding me? Not only am I going to go back there every time I need my dog to get surgery, which hopefully is never again, but also I'm going to tell everybody I know how reasonable they were, how cared for I felt. Also I haven't been sharing, this was an emotional journey. My dog was very hurt, and it was very stressful to be going through all of this. That a business would see that I just didn't like a thing and they made my life easier for me, made me a customer for life, and certainly a champion of their brand and of their cause. And that's the power of narrowing that gap. Because if you can deliver experiences like that, you're going to build champions. And that is how word of mouth continues to grow your business and your visibility as far as all of that's concerned. In addition to that too, I mentioned the call a little bit earlier. I was in a meeting about an hour and a half after I dropped her off at the veterinarian. They called me and I was literally in the middle of a slide, something like this, but a little bit different. And I couldn't pick up the phone. But as soon as I saw my little buzz, right next to my computer at my desk at my house, I was only focused on that. And when they sent me the text that, hey, everything's okay, just give us a call at your earliest convenience, that was profoundly helpful in me being able to make it through that meeting, which again, I would have happily dropped, but was just really thoughtful and something that went a long way as far as the customer experience was concerned. And then also they texted me after the surgery was done to arrange when I could come pick her up. Again, convenient. I didn't need to pick up a phone. They just met me where I was, and they allowed me to, schedule the business that I needed to be done. And so, again, we come back here and you think about all those times they could have acted on that feedback that they didn't, right? They could have, still figuring this clicker out. They could have checked back in from a survey perspective. Even if it was a phone call, I probably would have answered it. They could have seen the businesses that were recommended to me on that Facebook page, Facebook will send a link to say, hey, you've received a new recommendation from, John Smith or Sally Smith or whatever it might be. You could potentially follow up on that. Vet 2 just did a terrible job across the board, but if they'd acted on this, they could have potentially gotten another customer or another patient or gotten another appointment booked. All of those things, those actions mean something. And the more that you act, the more that you're going to build brand loyalty and repeat champion customers. And when I talked about a little bit earlier too, meeting them where they are, I certainly was sharing a lot of feedback as far as SMS, as far as text messages were concerned. This is huge. We are all on our phones more than we've ever been. And again, millennial here, it's only going to continue to get more invested. Gen Z is huge as far as chat, SMS, mobile. There is an expectation at that level that a business will be able to do things for them by means of that mode of communication. And when it's not, it is a jarring experience. I can speak with firsthand experience. I have cousins who are 23, 24, and some of the things that they tell me is just upsetting a number of ways. I was called geriatric the other day. I didn't like it very much. But the expectation here is that you're able to meet them where they are, which is their phone. And so the more you consider as a business how you're engaging with your customers or your prospective customers, the more you can incorporate text messaging, chat, SMS, chat, I guess texting and SMS is the same thing. But all those types of channels where you can communicate with someone live through a mobile device is going to give you an advantage over the competition of people who may or may not be doing something like that. Some statistics, not only is there a preference aspect to this, 70% wanting a business that can use messaging to get them faster support, 2/3 people who are expecting a response from business within 10 minutes, 500 million texts sent each month, and an 87% of consumers who are using social media and apps to be engaging with brand. The other fact of the matter is people open text messages more than they open emails. I mean, I use like that little badge that pops up on my phone. I get very upset if there is a badge there that says 1, 2, 3. If there's like unread texts on my phone, in fact, my pocket has buzzed a couple times just in giving this presentation, I will be thinking about it and devoting at least a little bit of my concern to like, okay, what am I missing out on? That doesn't happen with emails. I've seen so many screen shares or phone shares where people with their emails, they have something that's 5-6 figures of unreads. It gives me stress. I couldn't do it that way. But people ignore them and it's not nearly as big of a thing. And so whether you're in CX or whether you're just in marketing, I know this is a marketing panel, open rates and engagement rates are big metrics to understand. The more you meet them on their phones, the better those metrics are going to get. And more importantly, the more the content and the messaging that you're looking to deliver at a very minimum is getting before eyeballs that can engage with it and understand the content of what you're putting together. So again, you need to be listening. And then when you act, if you can act and meet them specifically where they might be, the better off you're going to be in the long run. And then number 3, analyze and learn from that customer feedback to make business changes. So when it comes to all those different interactions that I had, again, we talked definitely at length about at the micro level how much of an impact that had on me and the search I was on to be able to get the best care for my dog. But every one of those was a little piece of the interaction with one person. Certainly, you wouldn't want to be able to build an entire business model off of me and my particular use case. You need more data than that. It's a very small sample size. And while it's important at the micro level to take care of each and every customer that you have, make them feel heard, be empathetic, and understand and act in a way that you're delivering more of your brand promise, the more of a sample size you can attract, the more you can start to see trends and develop insights as far as how as a business can I do this better, right? The one vet that didn't respond to my social media post, assuming at some point they figured out how to listen to that. I'm still not sure that they ever will, but one thing saying, hey, I wasn't able to get to anybody. They could look at that and be like, oh, well, our receptionist or a social media person was out that day, or they were at a presentation, but this isn't a major problem. But if they get 10 posts like that, or they see more missed phone calls or more complaints over the course of their chat system, to be able to say, hey, there is a resource need as far as reception and understanding and engaging on that front line. You might need to hire somebody to do that specifically, or you might need to shift priorities so that that's a bigger priority for the person who's in that role, who's responsible for doing that particular thing. And so in learning that, the more data that you have, the better. So that's pulling in information from a lot of different places. It could be reviews, it could be social, it could even be blogs and website and newspapers and industry types of publications where people are evaluating the level of performance and the level of service that you're delivering. There could be other places with third-party data, whether that's industry information, market research, that sort of a thing. Certainly the messaging and the conversations that you're having with customers over the course of their journey with you, as well as those surveys that you're listening to as well. I know that I was talking a lot of smack on surveys a little bit earlier, but it actually came in really good use when I was willing to engage with it, if you remember vet number 3, right? That whole $750 off thing, they made themselves a customer for life because they sent their survey out in the right way and they were able to act on that very well. So if you can collect feedback that's that valuable and understand that at a macro level, you can start to understand and dictate where in that customer journey you could make things easier, you could improve, you can meet where they're going to be, ultimately whatever it needs to be able to convert that particular customer up the funnel and more closely to becoming one of your best customers. So once you aggregate all of that data in its many forms, it can be very messy. There's a lot of different places that it can live. It's going to be in different formats. This is where the world that we live in and the technology infrastructure, I don't know what the right set of words is, the technology world that we live in provides a number of different types of tools to help you start to understand what the content of this feedback looks like and help you spot trends. Again, I mentioned my company. We are a tool that does this, but there are a lot of them out there. Your Clara Bridges, your choruses, your anything that uses, look for the word specifically, natural language processing, sentiment analysis, machine learning, AI, to be able to take a review or a social post or a piece of feedback and specifically say, all right, in this particular piece of this chunk, they're talking about X, and this is how they feel about X. But further down, this is why. It's the overall experience, and it's positive. I could read that one. I couldn't read the one over there. And so being able to use technology to power the analysis of that feedback that you've been listening to and collecting can start to give you macro level insights that allows you to make business decisions that are quantitatively driven by the qualitative feedback that you're receiving. I can't believe I did that. I mess that up every time. And so if you can take a look and research, depending on sort of what business you have, what role and what type of data you're looking for, there's ways to do that with email. There's ways to do that with customer calls, call center, transcribing that information and analyzing it that way. There's ways to be able to connect survey feedback across different points and be able to say, oh, well, based off of these scores, I know if they answer the question about how easy it was to get an appointment or how easy was it to ask a question, that is a big piece of a place that we need to do better. And then you have all the information that you need to be able to evaluate, identify, and make the changes that you need to make as a business on a procedural level that can affect change at the macro level. Once you've used tools like this to be able to analyze that, which, as I mentioned a little bit before, if you're not taking into account the public feedback that's out there, your insights are going to start to be skewed, right? We had one client who is in the healthcare space, and based off of their survey feedback, follow-up seemed to be the place that they thought they had the biggest problem. And then they started working with my company, and they were able to take in review information in addition to the surveys that they had previously only been using. And they realized actually that people were the most pissed off about the billing process. They didn't ask a question about the billing process on that survey, and they never would have captured it because they didn't think that was something they needed to talk about or understand. But once they identified that billing was a problem, they switched the vendors that they were using or the technology that they were using to facilitate the billing process. And they also started asking a question on their survey to measure that a little bit more precisely. They asked and introduced the question on the survey as they were implementing the new process so they could get a baseline understanding of what their customers thought about the billing process, which went just about one-to-one with the feedback that they were getting publicly as well. Once they implemented the new billing service, the public feedback as well as the private solicited feedback, billing was mentioned 90% less because of the change that they made to be able to enable and improve that customer experience in a way where we're talking healthcare here. First off, no one likes dealing with healthcare bills, but if you know that that's easy, you are talking about the care of the most loved people in your life, whether it is yourself or whether it is your family. The easier you can make that, the more likely people are going to be working and more likely people are going to be engaging with you. So the analysis and the understanding of that feedback allowed that business to be able to learn. Learning is great, but also you need to be able to act upon it and empower all of the people in your organization to be engaged and sort of on the same mindset, which truly is a panel in and of itself. I think I've got 11 minutes left, so I won't be getting into too much detail, but there is the acquisition of the knowledge of all of this information and synthesizing it and understanding what it's saying. And then there is once we make a change, how do we put this to use in a way that everyone in the business is paying attention to it and caring about it? And that last piece is being able to, one, measure it in a way that is consistent across the board, and two, tie it to business outcomes. We have a metric within our platform, we call it reputation score. There are tons of metrics out there, whether it's CSAT, whether it's NPS, whether it's CES, whether it's you name the letters, stick them together. There's a way to figure out and measure levels of sentiment, levels of feedback at different points of whatever this customer's journey might look like. We work a lot in the auto space. One of our clients realized that the higher a business's reputation score was, the more cars that they sold. Once they communicated that throughout the organization, it was not hard to get all of the dealers on board with understanding that this metric was important and that they needed to do what they could to improve that score, right? Which generally included respond to your reviews, get more positive reviews, get more reviews in different sources, that sort of a thing. But because they knew that it was tied to a business outcome, they were bought in and more incentivized to be driving that business outcome themselves. There are also ways to do this where you're incentivizing people by means of their compensation, which indirectly, I'm really not good at this clicker. We're almost done and I haven't figured it out yet. Which indirectly this was doing as well, as far as the comp level is concerned. You have to be a little bit careful in the levels at which what you're tying to comp, because ultimately people will do their best to game the system. As much as I hate to admit that just seems to be a fact of how these things sort of work. So there's a level of finesse and there's a level of strategy there as well in terms of doing that efficiently. But the biggest thing is the more you can tie the metrics of what you're measuring as it comes to the customer experience, the more likely you are to be able to change the behaviors that's going to improve the customer experience itself. And that's getting everybody in the organization bought in. And when you're able to do that, listen, act, and learn, your customers will know, and they will come back, just like this very happy doggy who's recovering from her surgery. So we've got about 8.5 minutes left. Does anybody have any questions? Get in the box.
What's the biggest or most common issue when you talk about the difference between the brand promise and the experience? What's the most common cause of a gap?
That's a good question. The question was, when there is a gap between the brand promise and the actual customer experience, what is the most common reason for that? I don't have the data in front of me. I wish I could give you a data-driven answer. My gut and my experience in dealing with a lot of these brands, a lot of times communication. That brand promise is assumed on the customer level, and it either isn't communicated clearly or there's been expectation that's been set either by a salesperson or an advertising campaign or whatever it might be. And it's not necessarily sales. I know you're all thinking it's sales, isn't it? It's not always. Sometimes it is. But even on the customer experience side, when those expectations are not aligned with the actual promise of the brand, there's a reason that they were misaligned. And usually it's because either of the way that they were communicated or that they weren't communicated the right way. I guess that's the same thing. Yes, communication would be my first and foremost. But from there, I mean, gosh, resources, scalability, time, technology. There's so many different reasons that could go astray, that it really is important to understand what your customers are telling you about why that promise has gone wrong, because it can be so different depending on the business and the experience. Anybody else?
I have two questions actually.
Okay.
The first one is, as a business owner, how would you recommend I incentivize my team to get more reviews on Google? And then the second one, is there a specific SMS tool that you recommend to use?
What kind of business are you, if you don't mind me asking?
We do tailoring.
Okay, great. For starters, we can, I'd say on that level, the most common thing I've seen is, well, certainly requesting reviews is like paramount. If there's a way for you to be able to do that in an automated fashion without it being a manual, hey, a person to person, I go to pick up my garment and, would you mind leaving a review? Like, that is the most basic level of doing it. If you have, one way that I've seen a lot of local businesses do it is get a QR code on the back and have them all have different cards or different business cards. Say, hey, it'd be really helpful if you could scan this QR code, and all the QR codes go to the same place, but the QR has the number of scans that they might have. That's a way you could potentially incentivize. Hey, if you mention that I'm the person who did the garment, that's a way, you could do that by mentions. You try not to recommend the mentions as often, because then it does sort of look like it might be coached. And you don't want to encourage people to only leave good reviews. That can really backfire. If you see a review, let's say a business has 50 reviews, and you look in there and like maybe 45 of them are positive, but then one of the 5 ones says, they told me to leave them a good review and I'm not going to do it. Doesn't that change your opinion of all of the 45 reviews that are positive that you definitely didn't read? There's the ability in the review in Google to sort by the lowest reviews first. People click that all the time. I know I do. Not only to see, all right, well, if stuff's going to go wrong, what's it going to look like? But 2, specifically, well, how are they handling it when there was a bad experience? Are you responding? Are you providing an opportunity for that situation to improve? Great. But if I start to not trust the sanctity of the reviews that you have, that can be a big no-no. So I would say on that front, business cards is an easy way, and then you can do it by scans. There are tools that allow you to send SMS requests through a phone, where maybe it's a bit.ly link or something like that, to be able to say, hey, here's a link if you wouldn't mind reviewing it to me, or I'm going to pick the garment up. Hey, would you mind if I texted you a link real quick? We're trying to gather as much feedback as we can. Would you mind leaving us a review? Sure. You've got my number, and you can text me that, and I can click the link. That link can track who and how it was sent. One thing Google's not great about is attribution on their public-facing informations. So like, they won't tell you, for instance, that this review is left because this user clicked on your email campaign or your QR code or the SMS link. All they'll say is this user left this review. Now, you can track the engagement metrics of some of those requests as well in a way to be able to incentivize. But yeah, that would be my answer to the first one. And the second one, you'd mentioned SMS. There are tons of vendors out there that allow you to do SMS messaging at scale and potentially in an automated fashion. So if there's a means by which you are taking in customers and managing their profiles like a CRM or sort of a customer workflow system, there are a lot of those types of tools that can automate and connect to that particular software. so that instead of your employees asking for these reviews, an email or a text message goes out automatically when you've registered that they've picked up their garments or whatever it might be. So automating that usually leaves a lot less to chance, because one, it gives your team the ability, it's not reliant on a single person. And two, it gives you a much broader way to be able to capture some of that information. But honestly, if you Google SMS review requesting, you should be able to find a number of different companies that should be able to help you. Again, my company does that as well. So if you're interested, you can certainly talk. Anybody else?
Question for the B2B businesses.
Mm-hmm.
If you're running NPS already, which obviously you don't want to be asking every 2-3 months for feedback on that particular type of feedback, what other types of surveys would you recommend, and how often would you survey?
Well, I think it's important from a B2B perspective, which, this greater conversation has been not primarily B2C. It applies to all businesses, but certainly, especially with social and some of these other review information, is a little bit more feedback in the B2C world than the B2B space, where when you're in B2B, you need to be very agile and very specific to whatever your customer journey might look like. Now, the shorter you can keep those surveys, the better. So that's one piece of it. And another thing is also being responsible and acting on them. Because a lot of times we hear companies say, we do NPS, and it doesn't really work. And we ask them, well, when are you sending the survey out? 30 days after they become a customer, and then once a year after that. What are they really measuring if they're doing that? They're just creating a metric to be able to report to their investors and the rest of the team. What if it was, hey, we sent you a 2-question survey after every quarterly business review? Or, hey, did you have an intro demo with our team or an intro call? How did that go? Did you learn what you wanted? Did you get out of this meeting what you were hoping to get from it? Now, measuring all of those, could that question that's asked on those touch points be an NPS question? Absolutely. It could also be a number of other ones. But really integrating feedback as a part of the way that you're doing business with a particular, with your customers, creates an expectation that if what I'm receiving isn't what I'm expecting, I can tell you, and that will make a difference, which makes all the difference. I said difference like 8 times, which makes all the difference in the world when it comes to working with a business that you trust and working with a business that you don't. Because if you see them listen to that feedback and act on it, the more likely you're going to want to do business with that particular type of team. So NPS is a very valuable tool, but also the placement of the NPS question as it relates to how your customers do business with you is just as, if not a more important tool than that. And that's my time, everybody. Thank you all my voice coming back up. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to me talk about customer experience, and enjoy the rest of the conference.